We can also, based on the way this survey was designed, we can compare it to past surveys. There's 2 prior surveys that we can directly relate it to in some areas and see whether or not anything's changed.
Nice.
And now, as a separate topic, the RAB, does that fall into this category?
Yep.
Okay, good. Well, then I guess I'll keep talking here. So we had our second orientation meeting just a week or so ago. And the thing that I would want to comment about the way the meeting was run was that we're trying to get through their agenda, the Air Force's agenda, but it was very clear that this meeting, as well as the first meeting, which I was not able to attend, were both full of a lot of questions. And in this particular meeting, it seemed that more than one person was coming to the realization that this committee is not intended to be a voting body to drive the Air Force. Somehow that's entered into the mindset, and it's simply, obviously, not true. I pointed back to the 4-page RAB description that was handed out some months ago, and said, even in there, it didn't say that was the case. So trying to get people to look at what was available to them, and it wasn't a bait and switch. But there was some great disappointment that they weren't going to just somehow come in and vote the problems away. The Air Force very clearly wants to slow down the rate of the meetings, and I don't think anybody at the table representing the community wants to see that. So we would like to see it maintain roughly a monthly meeting. However, there is no monthly meeting in October. Our next meeting is the beginning of November 1st. So we're already starting to see a little slippage in pace. So it's just something to keep in mind. That's it, I guess, if there's any questions on the RAB.
Are those meetings open to the public?
Yes, they are.
Are they held here at the library?
They are held here at the library in a kind of horseshoe fashion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we intend to hold the future meetings at the library or the Methodist Church?
Well, that was a good question. There was discussion of both places. It had to do with which one was available. And they're just because they don't know when we're going to choose the next meeting date until the meeting actually occurs. So they're only thinking of a month or so out. So I think they come in with some basic knowledge of the availability of the Methodist Church. And here they don't know because the librarian's already left. So they kind of take the date and figure out what the next location will be. So they don't know what location will be for November 1st. So that's that's a good question, but I'm not sure that, and it's only the answer is really just generally, we don't know. We're going to fly with one place or the other.
Okay, so be on the lookout for public notice.
Be on the lookout for changes of venue. That's right. So it won't always be here.
Okay. Thank you, Tim.
You're welcome.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I would just like to mention the IET committee. We had intended, I think we spoke to a number of people here a couple times about the fundraising dinner that was supposed to happen this week.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there were some problems with the facility and some of the staff there with some illnesses and so on. So it just wasn't going to happen this coming week as planned. So they've put that off. We put that off until spring. With the thought that by springtime there will actually be some action in various points of the path. Plainfield Township is having some sort of a ribbon cutting ceremony either in November or December. They're moving right along with their part of the project over there. And of course the Mill Street Bridge is supposed to start in the spring of next year, and the bike path has been engineered into that plan. So that will officially be the beginning of the path when they start on that bridge. So I want to thank everybody that volunteered, and be assured that in the springtime I'll be calling on you again for serving at the dinner. So
Sure.
No problem.
And Jamie, I overlooked one more. I forgot about
Okay.
Develop by Osco.
Okay.
So
Back to you.
That's right, back to me. So Develop by Osco is sponsoring or collaborating with to put on a Showcase IOSCO event again. And that event is October 14th. It's a Saturday. and it begins at 11 a.m. and ends at 3 p.m. There's information about this on, I believe it's the county website, and I think there's also a Showcase Iosco website. But we're going to have something that we'll put together for the Oscoda website. We have a picture, a poster that we can post there, and
Okay.
we're talking about having a presence at the event for Oscoda itself.
Do you know the venue for that?
It'll be Tawas High School.
Okay.
It's actually advertised on the Oscoda Chamber
Thank
website as
you.
well. It's in the e-blast. And our booth will be combined with the Chamber's booth. So we'll have a combination of material.
Great.
Finally done.
You sure?
I am.
Anybody else? Road committee, anybody?
Nothing new on the road committee.
Okay.
We've kind of spent our money for this year, I think, or close to it. And, no,
Okay.
nothing new.
All right, well then moving on to reports, we'll start with Superintendent Bob Stocker. First item on the agenda is Huron Pines proposal Sunrise Park invasive species treatment.
Thank you. I've attached to my report an agreement with Huron Pines, basically intended to facilitate treatment of the Phragmites that are growing along the shoreline at Sunrise Park. Huron Pines, for those of you that may not be familiar with them, is an organization based in Gaylord with the mission of natural resources conservation. I had provided some information from the website, which generally outlines their mission. This discussion started with an observation by one of our staff members that the Phragmites were gaining a foothold on the park property. They appear to be spreading. The cost would be limited to the township, $200. The total cost is $400. The other $200 is covered by a grant that Huron Pines is able to access. And although that cost is relatively modest, there is an agreement which requires a signature, so I thought it appropriate to bring it before the board. I'm seeking authorization for the supervisor or myself to sign the document. If the supervisor is available, we would do that. If not, I would go ahead and sign it. I note that there has been some handwritten language added to the agreement to clarify our cost is not to exceed $200.
Any discussion?
Bob, you guys are gonna look at any more than just the park north of town here in Pines?
I would have to ask our DPW representative that. I know when I went out and looked, that's what we focused on.
Yeah, I know, I'm concerned with Riverbend.
We can certainly take
That
a
would
look
be
at it.
the next one in my eyes that might have that endangered species there, invasive species.
Okay. We will put that on the viewing list.
Any other discussion?
I think this is a no-brainer. It's a good deal. I make a motion that we go ahead with this and thank Huron Pines, if you would do that. Thank Huron Pines for getting involved and providing a lion's share of the money.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Byer, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call, please.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes.
Motion is passed. Next item, professional services, contract expirations.
Yes, we have been talking recently about procuring engineering services, and that process is underway to develop a recommendation for the board. But during that discussion, we talked about the purchasing policy, which contains a specific provision relating to professional services. It was decided several years ago that the general approach would be to contract for professional services for 2-year terms with the potential for extending for an additional 2 years at the board's discretion. We have 2 contracts that are going to expire at year end, one involving Northern Assessing and Consultants, and the other Stevenson and Company, our auditors. Was Stevenson Graysick previously. I've provided copies of the applicable contract agreements and the RFP documents that were issued for the services several years back in different time frames, which I'll explain in a moment. So the basic question is then whether the board wishes to solicit bids or consider negotiation with one or both providers for a contract extension. I note in the case of Northern Assessing and Consultants that an employee has just recently left the company and a question has been posed as to the potential for contract extension. You might imagine there's some concern that they not go out and recruit an employee with that question mark hanging with less than 3 months on the current contract term. And in fact, some concern was expressed as to the feasibility of recruiting an employee under those circumstances. So, not that we can't deal with that, but it is a potential issue for that vendor. I've provided report excerpts from the fall of 2013 when we last talked about bidding. In the case of assessing, we did solicit proposals and received one response from the incumbent contractor. In the case of audit services, the determination was made to negotiate a proposal, which was done and brought back to the board and accepted. So I am seeking direction from the board as to whether bidding processes should be undertaken for one or both services, or in the alternate, we would consider negotiation with one or both contractors to bring a proposal back before the board.
Any discussion? Questions?
From what you've said, as I understand it, if we were to continue one or both of these, it would be for 2 years, and then we can extend for another 2 years during the initial 2 years, is that right?
Well, we're at the end of the second 2-year extension under the policy provision. Certainly, it's at the board's discretion if you want to consider extending. You have, I think, the ability to deviate from the policy. It's intended as a guideline. But we are, at December 31, both contractors will have fulfilled 4 years under the current arrangement.
Any other questions?
Well, I was wondering, we discussed Friday that the language in the policy needs to be cleared up. I was wondering if you had a chance to look at that since then, because it's a little confusing, because in the policy, it actually states where it appears there could be 6 years. So that probably should be cleared up. But in terms of, I believe, if I read this correctly, 4 years ago, when it was sent out for bids, there was only one response for the assessing position.
Yes.
You know, the township business is kind of new for me. From my experience in business, my personal thoughts were when I needed services for my business, I would call around and get the best price. And as long as that service continued on an ongoing basis at a, without problems or glitches, and the prices didn't, escalate astronomically year over year, it made life a lot easier to just stick with one service provider. Now, I know we need to take a look at keeping our costs at a minimum, which is important to make sure we're not overspending, but given our geographic location, in some instances for various types of services, it may be difficult to find multiple bidders, and it seems like kind of an exercise in futility to send out a bunch of requests and then only get one bid from the person we already have. I don't know if we might get a better price, or could we get a better price if we did extend it for a longer period of time, for 6 years? Maybe just something to think about and consider, because I think in both cases, both of these contractors, to my understanding, have done a very good job. I don't think we've had any problems with the assessing or the CPA.
Any other thoughts?
In the past with Northern and Stefan, we have good luck and good relations with them, so I don't see no problem with them two companies at all, like put it out for bid, They've never been overcharging us or nothing, so.
Do we have any talks with them on what the cost for another 2-year contract would be? Have we gotten any information on that?
I have not approached them pending discussion tonight.
So you would be
Okay.
looking for a motion for each one, whether you want to negotiate or go out for bids, correct?
Right,
Okay.
right.
Anybody else? Or a motion
Did-
for one or the
The
other?
last time we went out for bids for auditing, we did get some bids,
We did,
you know.
we did.
A contractor or an auditor from Sault Ste. Marie area was one of them, comes to mind.
That may be correct. I think we received 3 is my recollection. But yeah. But that was essentially, I believe, 2009.
Yeah.
It goes back quite a
Okay.
ways.
And I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, but the last time we had multiple bids, we went with Stevenson Graysick, and they were the highest offer price. And we went with them. They've done a good job for us, but they were the highest bid.
I do not recall, honestly.
I don't
Certainly
remember.
that's,
I don't think they were extreme high, but if you remember before that, we went
Oh,
out for
yeah, we've
bids
had
and had
some-
Raymond and Robson, and they
Yeah.
were the cheapest bid.
But I
and
guess what I'm
they
getting
quit
at
in
is,
the
I
middle.
think that when we did that, I'm fairly sure that we just wanted them, and we went, if they weren't the highest, they were the second highest, they were right up there. And I think all other firms since then have said, well, these guys want Stevenson Graysick, so why should we even bid? That might be part of the reason why we don't get very many bids for that particular service, I don't know. Just a little background, since we have 3 or 4 relatively new members of this board.
That was news to me.
Okay, anybody else? Questions, thoughts? If not, I'm looking for some type of a motion for each individual discussion.
well, one thing I would say is if we're going to pursue bidding with folks, if that's the direction we're heading, it should be with the intent of trying hard to reach an agreement, because once numbers start coming out publicly as to whether they're and that's part of why I didn't pursue negotiation. Now, once those numbers come out, it does complicate the bidding process a little bit. Certainly, they could bid a different number than what was negotiated if they wished to, but it does compromise that process a little bit, so.
That's right.
Well, I'll make the motion that we go with Stevenson and Company, try to negotiate a new contract. Oh, you're sporty?
He said for how long?
Oh, for the new the new 2-year,
2 years.
and then extend the 2 years when,
I'll support that.
And I just want to make it clear that my remarks about the last time there were multiple bidders is all I'm trying to do is explain a little bit why we get such limited bids, because I think since they were far from the lowest bid, if not the highest, I would imagine that other companies have said, why go through the bother? These people, really want Stevenson. And they've done a good job for us, as far as I can tell. And I know the county has them, and Oscoda Township, I believe. So that speaks well. Not that we have to follow everybody, but my point was just trying to pose a explanation of why there are not a lot of bids.
Yep.
Used to be. I really can remember one from the accounting firm in Sault Ste. Marie area, So geography doesn't seem to be a problem, so.
so the motion was by McGuire and supported by Gajewski. to do the negotiations with Stevenson and Company for a new contract. Any other thoughts, questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky.
Yes.
Okay, motion is passed. So for the assessing, anybody have any other thoughts or want to make a motion?
Yeah, I move that we go ahead with Northern Assessing for another 2 years with 2-year extension possible.
A support.
Okay, motion, or any thoughts? Motion by Mr. Byer, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call, please.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Okay, motion is passed. Next item, budget work session meeting schedule.
We have had one budget work session, and all of our board members were not able to attend. That was on September 20th. Based on that scenario, we focused on the budget overview process instead of talking about specific topics. We now have those topics to deal with, plus follow-up discussion as to reconciliation options and potential modifications to the budget. So presumably, we will need to schedule another meeting. So I'm looking for feedback as to what the board might consider to be acceptable in terms of dates and times. If there is some question, we could take whatever feedback we get this evening and then try and coordinate something after the fact. But any guidance in that regard would be helpful.
Usually you suggest some days. You're not doing that tonight.
Shame on you.
Is there a reason?
Too hard to pin us all down?
Well,
I guess suggestion of
I-
no dates.
yeah. That's a little bit difficult because we're missing one member, so I didn't
Right.
necessarily want to throw dates out there that might be problematic right out of the chute.
Okay.
Maybe we should set it aside till we hear what's gonna work. What'll be better, maybe?
We could, or again, if there's some consensus, we certainly could do that, or if there's some consensus as to what definitely will or won't work from various perspectives, then we could try and winnow it down.
What kind of time frame are we looking? 1 week, 2 weeks? How soon do we want to or need to get going?
I would think probably next week would be the soonest.
The soonest?
Yeah.
Yeah.
From a staff preparedness standpoint or a board as a whole attending standpoint?
Both.
Okay.
How about the week of October 9th? Anybody got anything that's too,
I think that's perfect. You know, that puts us the week of our next meeting, right? And then, so we won't have an update on the topic, but at least we could be meeting as an entire board that following week, which gives a little bit more time to the conservativeness of next week being possibly not enough time.
right?
So,
If that's the case, and we will all be together before then, we could make the determination then if we're gonna wait that long anyways.
fair enough.
We could set up a tentative date, maybe, and then see if that flies.
The 11th is
12th.
great for me, for whatever it's worth.
The 11th works for me as well. All
Okay.
day.
I will be coming back from fall conference that day, but can be here in that late afternoon.
Afternoon works for me.
It's a Wednesday, Jim.
I know.
He's got his calendar.
I have a beautiful calendar here compared to Mr. Palmer. His is rather plain looking.
Well, that's a matter of judgment. Mine's bigger and has some nice pictures in it.
High
I'm
tech.
gonna give you enough time, Bob, after Monday's meeting?
Okay, good.
So,
Do you want- End of day, like we did before?
yeah.
Is that enough time? I mean, is the 2 hours that we worked last time, is that enough to put a substantial dent in the workload?
I'm thinking we're probably going to need one more, frankly.
Okay.
So it's a matter of discretion as to how long we want to stay and try and grind it out. But some of the discussion topics could
Get lengthy.
Sure.
take some time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we could do maybe a 3 o'clock again, if it goes a little further, possibly to 6, is what you're thinking? As an opportunity?
So you need a motion?
All right, so then I would, I move to schedule our next Township Board work session regarding budget to October 11th, starting at 3 PM, allocating 3 hours.
That sounds good. Support? Okay, motion by Mr. Cummings, support by Ms. McGuire. Roll call, please.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes,
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes.
Okay, motion's passed. Next topic, utility billing clerk resignation date, new hire placeholder.
Yes, thank you. I've attached some correspondence from our outgoing utility billing clerk. And you might recall that Hannah had submitted a resignation effective September 22nd. However, we just discussed that subsequently, and she is willing to remain available for work on an as-needed basis on dates that are mutually agreeable through October 30th, and potentially beyond that, but I thought that was a reasonable cutoff so that she can plan accordingly. And she has submitted correspondence indicating that. I would expect she would actually work less than half the days that she would normally be scheduled, maybe substantially less depending, but it would ease in the transition and potentially, depending on when we get somebody on board, help in the training phase of that transition. So that would be part one to this topic is hopefully the board considering endorsing the modified resignation date for Hannah of October 30th. The other element of this item was a placeholder for an employment recommendation. I do not have one this evening, but I do have feedback on a topic that was brought up Friday at our pre-board work session, and suggestion was made that we might consider contracting with F&V to meet the needs of this particular position and function. I've spoken with the contract manager. They would be willing to put a proposal together if we were interested. It's not going to be available tonight, as you might expect, but they would be willing to do that. They have done it in the past in some specific situations. My impression is it's been a while. The discussion was the prospect of saving money, depending on hours worked and all that, is probably somewhat limited, but nonetheless, if the board wishes for them to put together a proposal, they would be willing to do that.
Okay.
So guidance in that regard might be helpful as well.
Okay. Any discussion?
yeah, how many candidates have you interviewed, or have you received resumes for at least?
We have interviewed 4, and I'm going to say we've probably got between 15 and 20 applications.
It's a pretty good return.
They're still coming in.
Well, all right.
Any other questions?
Well, I would like to, at least like to see what their proposal would be. We can continue to look for an employee, but I think it would make sense at this point, since we're without an employee, it wouldn't make sense to, go on, look into that sort of a thing if, when you have somebody in place as an employee. But at this point, since we don't have anybody, you don't have any prospects right now, it might make sense to at least look at their proposal to see what that would entail, because it would take one employee off the books of the township.
Any other thoughts? Is there a motion?
Well, I move to extend Hannah's resignation to October 30th, first of all.
Support.
Okay, motion by Mr. Cummings, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call?
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Motion's passed. And Tim, you were gonna say something else? No.
Sure. I'd like to give Bob the opportunity to investigate with FOV, the opportunity to contract that position as well.
I just wanna
I
say.
didn't say that
to-
as a motion, did I?
No, that's okay. I think
I
you just
we
need a
can-
direction, right?
There's a direction,
Okay.
thank you.
I just want to say that I want to thank Hannah. She's been putting together a booklet, little manual of the different things that she's been doing in the office to try to help the new person, and I really appreciate her staying on to help because it's a big change, so,
I would agree. She's
I
done a nice job.
think that's great.
yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay. Next topic, Township Hall Improvement Schedule compilation.
Yes. The Board will find attached to my report a list of proposed improvements that Mr. Nordine put together. These were recently discussed with Building and Grounds Maintenance staff, and it's our intent to work with John in undertaking the improvements on an incremental basis. That would be subject to the confines of the purchasing policy whereby those items requiring board approval would be brought before the board. Part of the reason this is being pointed out specifically this evening is there's always some element of subjectivity when dealing with improvements and the related aesthetic judgments that have to be made. So John and I thought the board should be aware of the plan and the specific items outlined in the list. The costs, and John probably would emphasize this more than I guess, are to be considered preliminary at this point. They're ballpark costs, so everybody should be aware of that. And none of the individual initiatives or work elements is chiseled in stone. If there were concerns or questions, certainly we could revisit those. When we talked to the Building and Grounds Department folks, they indicated that there were some large projects / needs in the building involving HVAC improvements and sewer pipe replacement, sanitary sewer under some of the floors, and depending on where we wanted to go with those improvements, it might affect how we would approach some of the more minor items on the list. So more to come in that regard.
Okay. Any questions or add to?
Yeah, John, your list seems to have some bracketing with heavy, bold, horizontal black lines. Is there?
No, just, I try to put things in order of logical implementation, so I wouldn't want to do something that would negate something later. So it's just a chronological list, in my estimation at least.
Okay.
So those things in the brackets would seem to, in my estimation, naturally go together. If you're doing this, you do this at the same time, or
Okay. Did you talk to the police or fire department at all about anything of this ilk that they would like?
I did not. It is a good point. I did not, and it's certainly feasible that they would be interested in something similar.
Okay.
Any other thoughts? Okay, moving on. Community Development Coordinator, Ann Richards. First topic is Ani Medical Veterans Administration.
Great, thank you. At the March 27th meeting, the board approved a renovation project in the Veterans Affairs Suite, which is located in the Ani Medical. This was to make modifications to the doors, adding magnetic holders, basically. Similar to the tenant improvement project that we originally did, the township upfronts the cost and then the VA reimbursed back was the plan. That work was completed over the weekend of July 14th, and at the July 24th meeting, I made the board aware that the contractor was done and the VA had signed off, and we were waiting for the county inspector to approve as well, the electrical inspector. And the board approved paying the contractor pending the inspector's approval. The inspector did grant approval on the 26th of July, so we paid the contractor, and then I believe around August 25th, we're reimbursed back from the VA. So that project is now closed out. Basically, it's I guess you'd call it a wash. I mean, there was no cost to us. The exact amount was reimbursed back, but that improvement is, now part of the suite itself, which is, again, magnetic door holders that will work with the fire alarm system, should they hopefully never have to be put in place.
Sure.
So,
Okay,
that's
any
it.
questions or discussion? Okay, next topic kind of relates to resolution that's further on the agenda, MEDC redevelopment ready communities.
Right, I just want to give you a little information about that resolution later on tonight. At the July 24th meeting, I provided information to the board in regard to the MEDC, or Michigan Economic Development Corporation program, which is entitled Redevelopment Ready Communities, or RRC. As discussed, previously explained, I guess, the RRC is designed in a way that lets a community move towards certification at its own pace. As such, there's no required drop-dead date for reaching that certification. That being said, as of October 1st, the engagement in the RRC process is going to be used by MADC to basically prioritize if you're doing grant applications with our organization. So, according to MEDC, since Oscoda has a traditional downtown, we only need to be engaged in a good standing, which means that we're working towards sort of certification. After review of that material and discussion at that July 24th meeting, the board did approve moving forward with the program to become a certified RRC. Based on that direction, I did attend a meeting that was, or I should say training that was held in August, and I've completed that training that is now necessary. So we have that completion. That doesn't mean that other people can't go to training at further dates, but we have completed the requirement, so that is done. So this evening, the board is being asked to adopt Resolution 2017-20, which is, again, this resolution is also a requirement of the process, and this basically just indicates the township's board commitment to move forward with the pursuit to becoming certified.
Okay, any thoughts, discussion?
And does this cover the whole DDA district?
Well, what do you mean, I guess, what do you mean, does it cover the whole DDA
Well,
district?
Specifically stating downtown, but our DDA district is a lot bigger than that.
Oh, it's not, yes, I guess the short answer would be, you're supposed to have a traditional downtown, but these projects, it's for anything that occurs in a downtown. There's two different segments of MEDC. They have like more industrial area, which is, another division, and then they have this division, which is the RRC communities. So, yes, it would be the entire downtown, or DDA district, I should say.
Okay.
Yes. But you need to have a core downtown. They don't like to look at, like, maybe commercial corridor. Some communities only have a, kind of like a strip mall community, or, a corridor type thing. They need to have more of a core downtown, which we've kind of established that as being the blueprints area, which is, a smaller section of the DDA district, but.
Okay, so then maybe I'm confused. I thought I was going toward the understanding that this represented all the DDA
It does.
area, but,
Right, it does, it's just you need to have a core downtown. Our DDA district is larger than our core downtown,
oh, I see.
Right.
Got it. I get what you're saying.
yes.
By a mile.
That's right. Fair enough, I knew that. but
Right.
Just wanted to know which we were looking at
Right.
which point. Okay.
Anybody else?
Well, I would just like to say, I think this is a very good move for us to get involved in this at this time. I think any interaction we can have with the MEDC is a positive. I think it was good that Ann was able to take the classes and be certified.
Yeah.
I would suggest that at a minimum, we at least have our zoning administrator take some of the classes pertaining to zoning and some of those issues as it relates to the
Yeah.
RRC.
If not the zoning administrator, then members of the planning commission themselves, because
Right.
there were, at the training that I went to, there were staff and there were also planning commission members, board members.
Right.
So, yeah.
I would say at a minimum.
Right.
I would think some of the planning commission members might want to.
Right. The more the
involved in that.
merrier,
But
that
the
are,
more-
that
yeah,
know the
yeah,
program,
yeah.
yes.
I think it's a very good step for our township to participate in
Is
this.
this training available online?
No, it's a class that you have to
You
go
have to go to
to.
class.
You, I mean, to become certified, I guess, you could get the material, you know, I have the thumb drive that has all the material on it, so you could review the material, but the class itself is, you have to go and
You have to be
attend.
certified.
Okay, we'll be dealing with the ordinance or the resolution coming up here.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ann. Resolutions and ordinances. First up is the medical marijuana draft ordinance presentation. And this is regarding the 2 readings and publication, correct?
Correct. If we wish to proceed in the adoption process, yes. The number of this ordinance would be 2017-260. If we wish to move ahead with it, that is the process in general. Introduce, do the first reading, publication, second reading, adoption, final publication.
Okay.
So the Planning Commission has incorporated or undertaken a fair amount of time and effort putting the ordinance together. It has been reviewed and modified by our township attorney. Those highlights are in yellow on the draft you received. And the Planning Commission has done a public hearing, held a public hearing. So one of the questions always is with these types of ordinances to start out the discussion, assuming we want to move forward in consideration of it, does the board feel inclined to have an independent public hearing on its own? And you certainly have that prerogative before we consider the actual adoption process.
Any thoughts or discussion?
I have a question. Have we integrated our plans and thinking with Oscoda Township? Or are we gonna end up doubling facilities and so forth? I mean, has the planning commission factored that in? Oscoda is a little bit ahead of us, as I understand it.
The Oscoda Township were part of the planning group. So as we were writing the draft ordinance, they had representatives there. It almost mirrors ours.
Okay. So they're not gonna be separate or different in large part, is what you're saying. But what about the number of facilities that, you know, the sales venues and so forth? Are we gonna end up with too many if it passes? You know, I mean, let's say we settle on a number of downtown retail stores, and let's say that number is, I'm just making this up, 4, 5. And Oscoda has said they like 3. So now we have 7. Is that too much? You know, I think that.
I believe theirs was stated in the paper recently that, and they limited their dispensaries to.
Bob, can you come to the
downtown.
podium? Thank you.
From what I recall, the Oscoda Township, as stated in the paper, also had limitations to the amounts of their downtown dispensaries. All other facilities like grow facilities and processing is limited to their industrial and agricultural areas. So the only thing that would really come into effect would be their dispensaries, their what we're calling dispensaries, actually, it's provisioning centers, would be limited to their downtown. And I recall it being in the paper, they limited that possibly to one.
And we've limited to no dispensaries in the B1 district, so there won't be any in the downtown area, and we've limited to the other areas to 2.
Right.
So saying again, as a member of the planning commission, both of you, that you are saying no dispensaries in the downtown area at all.
Correct.
State Street, US 23, okay,
In the B1 district.
all right.
That's in the contract,
It's already
in the
there, yep.
ordinance.
That's what the wish is that sent back to the planning commission.
What about the base? Do you recall what,
B2 in the B2 district.
two?
2 in a B2 district, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thoughts?
There was a question raised at our work session Friday concerning the carbon filters. And I reviewed the statute, and I tried to contact our attorney to get some clarification on that. I didn't get a hold of him until late this afternoon. Since my understanding is we're going to do a first reading tonight, at our next meeting, we can review it and have a vote or whatever we're going to do, but I should have that answer to that question. What he stated was that we can't put anything in our ordinance that's over and above what the state would allow. We can't have an ordinance that's stricter than what the state requirements are. And the state requires the carbon filtration systems for odor control. Now, putting in a requirement in our ordinance that those filters be changed, he said he could take a look at that, and so we'd be certain. I didn't think that would be required because the state mandates, and when you require somebody to have some, it's kind of like state requiring you to have seatbelts in your car. Well, it's understood that they're going to be attached to something, so you're not just wrapping belts around yourself. So kind of the same thing would apply to the carbon filters, that if those odors have to be controlled, then that would imply that the filters have to be changed from time to time. But we would certainly have that answer by our next board meeting to have that confirmed.
Does the planning commission have the application completed?
No.
For these licenses?
No, we've put that off because of the time constraints with hours. We put that off until such time that it's determined that we're actually going to have an ordinance. Because if it gets voted down and there's no ordinance, then there's no reason to
Absolutely.
draft a permit and go through all the work of doing that. So, but in all fairness, we have looked at that in our work sessions from the Planning Commission and reviewed some ideas pertaining to the permit that we would issue. And if the ordinance is approved, we could have that put together in a fairly short period of time. We don't really need it until December 15th, so I think we have time.
Any other questions or concerns?
Question, Bob, is there any deadline, timeline for when this township has to decide yes or no?
I believe we're shooting for earlier mid-December.
Early or mid-December,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's our own self-selected timeline?
No, there is significance to that. I believe we need to have something in place by then,
Okay.
if we are going to move ahead with this.
Okay,
Well, that's when the license will begin to be issued by the state, is December 15th. And if there are people, and my understanding is from the zoning administrator, we've had people already from other states looking at properties here and interested in putting some facilities here in Oscoda. If the ordinance were to fail, then they would move somewhere else and look. But they're going to want to start on December 15th with applying to the state and getting those licenses approved. Not to say that we have to have it by December 15th, but if we want to keep on top of everybody else, like you said, Oscoda's already pretty much has their, it was unanimously approved by their board, so that's, the planning commission was kind of shooting to have everything together by, hopefully before December 15th.
And it was unanimous in Oscoda?
Yes.
Do you know if they had a full board that night?
I do not.
Okay,
Right.
No, they had one person missing.
one person missing. Well, a few minutes ago, we semi-tabled an issue about picking a date for a further work session because one member, in this case, the supervisor, was missing. I think this is just as important, if not more. That's why I'm asking the questions about the dates and the time that we have, you know. Why I asked that first. I really think this is pretty important to the community. And I would like to see us table this until we have a full board. I think it's that important. It sure seemed to be for picking a work session date. So
Is that a motion?
it would be a motion.
I would support that.
Motion by Mr. Byers, supported by Mr. Palmer to table until we have a full board. Roll call, please.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Byer.
Yes.
Okay, motion is passed. Next is Resolution 2017-20 regarding the redevelopment ready communities program that Ann discussed earlier. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay. This resolution, if adopted, commits the township to pursue the certification through redevelopment-ready communities. Oh, sorry. Through redevelopment-ready communities and presumably receive the benefits that are related to that in terms of grant program eligibility, et cetera. So we're essentially formalizing what we've talked about. The fact that we would like to become part of the program avails ourselves of those opportunities, and that involves doing a self-assessment, some things that are going to require some time and effort to address where we identify potential deficiencies. But that is part of the whole program, is kind of a candid assessment of where maybe you fall short and a deliberate effort to address those things.
Okay, any questions? If not, I'd be looking for a motion to approve the resolution.
So moved.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Gieske, support by Mr. Palmer to approve Resolution 2017-20. Roll call, please.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Motion is passed. Okay, next on the agenda is public comment, our second public comment period. You get 4 minutes still, but no card necessary. Is there anybody that would like to speak? Please step to the podium. If you could state your name and address. Thanks, Mark.
Okay. Mark Miller, one of the co-authors with Lisa Sutton and Arnie LaRich of the Technology Action Plan for the county. I appreciate the board in the last meeting appointing Tim Cummings to be the representative. And I printed off about 30 pages, well, 30 minutes today. And I'll give this to Tim, and he can decide whether he wants to share it. But it's the attendance of the developed by Osco from March of 2015 through July of 2016. It's generally about a dozen people, and it's sometimes higher, maybe 24 when they have the IT people in for the broadband, and that's it. So,
Thank you.
I got a gimpy leg.
Yeah, thank you.
Just pass that down.
Thank you, Mark. Anybody else? Okay, board comments, anybody? Okay, then I will be looking for a motion to go into closed session to consider purchase of real property.
Don't move.
Support.
Moved by Mr. Gieske, supported by Mr. Palmer to go into closed session. Roll call, please.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire.
Yes. Motion's passed. We are going into closed session.